Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and I'm taking care of business. Joining me today is Mike Simpson, Executive Director of Operations for the Canadian Energy Centre. Mike, you folks put out a new report today on the oil and gas industry and how it will continue to play a major role in the global economy through to 2050. Tell me some of the key findings you got from that report.
You betcha. So we need to take a step back and sort of look at where we got the data set from. We're talking about the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook that came in October. And what our research division did was it got the extended data set, which isn't, I don't think it's public, and took a dive into the four scenarios that the World Energy, that the report put forward: the net zero emissions scenario, the announced pledges scenario, the stated policy scenario, and the sustainable development scenario. And when we dug into the numbers, what it showed is that the stated policy scenario, or the step scenario, it appears to be the most plausible scenario moving forward. And when you dig into that, what it shows is that oil and gas is not going anywhere. And when you look at the step, the IEA itself said it provides the benchmark for sort of the conservative benchmark for the future growth, because it doesn't take for granted that governments will always reach what they've said they're going to do. I mean, they're governments. That's kind of, I mean, they don't always hit the goals that they put forward.
Yeah.
And so it took a real granular look, sector by sector, about what actually is put forward, what policies and measures are there, and what the chances are to get them achieved. And so STEP came through, and when you dig into it, it shows that oil and gas is going to be here until at least 2050, and from some pretty significant numbers.
Can you talk about maybe some of the numbers? First of all, let's talk about what we're expecting here in world production when it comes to oil and natural gas. We'll talk first about the world, and then maybe dig into Canada.
You betcha. So the world production is expected to go, and we did the numbers from pre-COVID for 2019. So pre-COVID, we were 95.5 million barrels per day. And the prediction is by 2035, it'll be about 101.4 million barrels a day. And then it might regress, this is oil again, down to about about 100 million barrels per day. So that's about 4 million more than we have now. And what's really important about that is that the oil that we have today, the 95 or 90, whatever we have right now from the 95.5, that's not going to stay just consistent. You have other factors. You have decline. You have different countries moving on to the scene. But to assume that what's built today will sustain us until 2050 isn't going to be the case. There will need to be some development. And if we look at what's happening right now in the Ukraine, for instance, and Russia moving into the Ukraine and invading the Ukraine, is that we need to have a discussion as Canadians, especially, of where do we want this oil to come from? Where do we want this development to come from? Because if we are going to defer development to other countries and not Canada, we are deferring it to places like Russia. We're deferring it to places like Iran or Saudi Arabia, and some of these less than appropriate countries that don't have some of those values that we have as Canadians at heart. And so what we're going to see over the next 30 years is a significant discussion about where we want to get our oil from. And we've taken the position, and we've had this position for about 2 years, we've been saying this, is that Canada should be the solution. We are a responsible developer. We are a democratic nation. We have private industry that follows robust regulatory processes. And so we should be the ones that provide the globe with its oil and gas.
So why, just as a little bit of an aside here, and just out of curiosity, as a person that is just a regular Joe here, like I'm just a regular schmuck, right? And I don't know a lot about what's going on out there in terms of the oil and gas industry. I'm not really in it, like my teeth in it. But so why have we gotten into this position in the world scale that so many places are relying, and not so much relying, but wanting and taking the oil from the places like Iran and Saudi Arabia and Russia, as you mentioned? Why has that occurred?
Well, there's been a lot of policy development in the West. So I talk Europe, Western Europe, North America, Australia to a lesser degree, where we've put climate policies forward. We've put policies forward to manage the environmental impact of oil and gas. The unfortunate part is that a lot of these policies have gone to a level where development hasn't occurred. If you think about Canada and the oil sands, for instance, there hasn't been a lot of greenfield development in the last 6 years. I believe Suncor had a SAGD plant come on stream here not too long ago, but that's been one of the few. And when I talked earlier about declines, when your oil, when you develop oil, it declines. You don't get the same sustainable production. And if you're not continuing to develop, eventually that oil from places like Canada will just continue to go down. And as a country, as a world, we still have a need for oil, 95.5 million barrels a day in 2019. So you're going to get that product from somewhere. Yeah. And the places that are developing that product right now is Russia, Saudi Arabia, the OPEC nations. And this is where we get into this scenario. Europe, really big on their climate policies, but they shut down their nuclear, which is a really, if you're wanting to remove CO2, nuclear is a really good way to go, but they've shut those down as well. And now recently they're talking about, well, we're going to fire our coal up again. So now that we have this Russian invasion, is that energy security has now become a more important discussion to have. And the decisions that we have to make as a country, as a society, is how do we want to make sure that that energy is secure? And we have to look at our policies to make sure that, especially here in Alberta, we're able to develop. In Saskatchewan, we're able to develop. Yeah. In BC, that the LNG Canada can get finished and the Coastal GasLink pipeline can get there. Because if we don't, we're deferring that production to what I would say the worst of the worst. And as Canadians, we have these values, and one of these values is sort of a global justice, social justice. We want to make sure that people around the world are taken care of. I mean, peacekeepers, right? That's one of our values. And yet we're deferring this energy development to countries that don't have those values. And now, as a Canadian society, is that what we want for the globe? And I don't think it is. I think folks in Eastern Canada would be really keen on having our oil and gas in the global marketplace rather than some of these other despot oils.
Let's not, let's not forget the impact that the industry has, say here in Canada, and even specifically in Alberta, whether it's in job creation or supporting jobs or the economy. Man, we just have to take a look at the recent Alberta budget, right, and the revenues and what a change that has made in last year, right? So that's the important element too that we tend to forget, or a lot of people tend to forget, right?
Yeah, you bet. And that economic development is greater than just the West. You talk about your supply chain and some of the pipe fitters out in Ontario, for instance. We were doing a nice Line 5 campaign, and we partnered with a union fellow from Ontario that wanted to make sure that this pipeline went forward or wasn't shut down, because it affected his business. It affected his livelihood. Yeah. Oil and gas is not just an Alberta product. It's not just a Northern BC or a Saskatchewan product. It is across this country, and its impact is significant from an economic perspective. Jobs, there are so many jobs about it, and we need to make sure that that's understood. And the good part about the data that we put out, this fact sheet, is that there is some significant potential here in Canada to really grow not only our international influence, because we'd be pushing out responsible energy, but to really grow our economy. We're in some significant debt right now because of COVID at the federal level. Oh, yeah. It's time for us to accept that and to find ways to bring that down. And energy is the solution. Canada is the solution to the global challenges, to say the least.
All right, super. Thanks, Mike, for joining us today.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
All right, that was Mike Simpson, Executive Director of Operations for Canadian Energy Centre. I'm Mario Toneguzzi. This has been Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.